sugars.
So I understand it being, a slow release
Yeah.
carbohydrate essentially, but how does that translate into tapping your fat reserves?
Good question. That's the.
Right. So
exactly.
during our study, we showed that we completely flatlined the hormone insulin.
Okay.
So insulin is a fat storage hormone. So when you take in those sugars, the signal that comes into the body is to raise insulin levels to get the sugar out of your bloodstream. But besides taking sugars out of your bloodstream, insulin's job is to prevent fat burning.
Okay.
So since we keep insulin low, we proved in our trials that it can break down and burn more fat throughout and post-exercise.
So it's the low insulin levels.
It's the low insulin levels, and the energy you're getting is that it's a sustained release. So it's kind of like during those 2 hours, you're literally getting fresh glucose at a timed rate out of your intestine into your bloodstream. Because it's breaking down, and as it breaks those bonds apart, glucose drips into your bloodstream. But it does it so steadily over time that keeps it so tightly knit to give you the blood sugar curve you saw before, while at the same time your body fat and the fat in your muscle cells is breaking down, and it's going into your bloodstream, and then it's getting shuttled toward your muscle cell to burn it off and give you that energy you're looking for, instead of relying on 300 calories per hour of, fast-acting sugars.
Okay, so it's the insulin response.
Yeah, so that's the biggest, so
Okay.
we teased that whole idea of fat burn, and this is sort of the, that slide is really, and it's funny, we met Greg and Eric at Ironman Lake Placid 2 years ago, I believe, and we had these graphs up, and I think the first thing that caught Greg's eye was the low insulin, because keeping insulin low is really one of the biggest keys to fat burn, and that.
You saw that? That's so hard to see the red line.
The red line
Here's
is
the graph, yeah.
insulin with Ucan, and the blue line is insulin without
With
standard.
With
maltodextrin.
maltodextrin.
What's in Hammer products and Goose?
So at the point, we were both sponsored by Accelerate. So maybe I shouldn't name names here, but we were sponsored by a company that uses maltodextrin.
It's a penny stock now anyway.
But that was the issue that we were feeling, is you could feel, at the highest you would feel is right after you took your nutrition in, and the lowest you would feel is right before you took your next bout of nutrition. So you would just get these peaks and valleys over a 9, 10, 17-hour day. It was miserable. So that's what took us over to the table at first.
And how does that compare with products that use multiple sugars, so not just maltodextrin, but?
I mean, like the dual source
Yeah.
carbohydrates. So, if you have things that are dextrose, which is another carbohydrate, that's even faster than glucose. So what they've done is they've either sliced the carbohydrates. So you know how I talked about how there's an enzyme that breaks down the carbohydrate in your intestines? They've made carbohydrates so they're even quicker to raise your blood sugar and get into the body quicker to avoid this breaking down in the intestines. So the thought is that, well, if this carbohydrate breaks down faster and this carbohydrate breaks down a little slower, even though it's much faster than you can, they're figuring that, well, it's going to enter the body at different rates, so it's going to help the body. But the problem that's happened is that a lot of them are fructose-based, and fructose actually goes to the liver first, and it can actually start the process of actually fat creation. And so there's been a lot of issues with these dual sources. Like Power Bar has a whole thing with their tri-source carbohydrate, but it's really ineffective because fructose has to convert to glucose to get into the bloodstream, and that just is a whole roundabout way of doing things in the body. So it's much more to use. If there's any advice, it's more to use pure glucose if you weren't going to use Ucan.
I was going to say, I think that from my experience at least, I've felt the best, aside from Ucan, on maltodextrin, which I think is a comment on how beneficial the Ucan system is. I've used things like Enervatine that do a sucrose. I mean, they just basically are pouring sugar into your mouth. So those multiple sugars didn't stack up to the maltodextrin, just the straight maltodextrin, which doesn't stack up to the Ucan, to the superstarch.
So what sugar type is Ucan?
Glucose.
Oh, it's
It's a
pure
glucose polymer, which means it's just a long chain.
Gotcha.
So glucose is like the 6-carbon chain. What he was talking about is there are these small glucose molecules. First thing that happens is they trickle in through the stomach, causing that GI distress. Then once they hit the intestines, they rapidly raise your blood sugar levels. So we're this long chain, so it breaks down nice and slowly out of your intestine into your bloodstream.
Right.
So with a lot of this science, I know we did get a little deep into it, but I think it's always good to understand the background to it. But even if you were to just have a few takeaways, what Ucan's really providing is that consistent and steady feeling of energy. So from a what you'll feel standpoint, you're not going to feel that pop or that buzz, but it's more like 30 minutes into your training session, 45 minutes in, you're still going to feel like you can push yourself hard. You're not going to be worrying about, do I need to take in any other nutrition? Again, you're not going to have that same brain drain because like Seth mentioned, when your blood sugar drops, your body starts pulling glycogen from your liver, which is the only thing that can feed your brain. So that's a big part of the reason why you feel that brain drain. So that's a big feedback we've gotten with UCAN is people are more focused when they're working out. And then the whole idea of burning fat, I think what we want to be clear about is you're sitting on the couch all day drinking UCAN. We're not telling you it's not a magic drink. Fat's not gonna melt away, but it's when you're using this as the carbohydrate to fuel your exercise instead of the carb sources we've talked about. Over time, there's no doubt that you will see that effect in terms of fat loss. And then even for some of you folks in here who are leaner and not so concerned about fat loss, I think we identified the fact that burning fat for fuel from a performance standpoint, just simply from an energy standpoint, is going to be beneficial. You're going to feel better energy when you have a steady release of glucose and you can burn fat. And long-term health-wise, which is something that I know often a lot of folks when they're in the racing mindset aren't thinking about their long-term health, but there's a huge long-term health benefit to not consuming all these sugars. I mean, all of you folks are doing exercise because you're health-minded. At the same time, a lot of the choices endurance athletes make to fuel their body and to fuel their workouts are so counterproductive to that goal of long-term health. In terms of prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, all these types of things that the increased sugar intake can really contribute to long-term keeping blood sugar stable will have a major long-term health benefit. So let's see. Go ahead.
Of intensity versus like fat burning, where there's a crossover where it actually makes sense to, yes, for low intensity, more moderate intensity, kind of Ironman level efforts, UCAN is going to make a lot of sense. But then in the last 5, 10, 15K of a race, where you're even at the same energy level, your heart rate is going up and you're kind of in that red line, you're using everything you can. Is there a point at which it makes sense to switch to a simpler sugar, even when you're using UCAN as your primary source of fuel, in order to get that, is there a point where you don't want that sustained energy release? You actually want that to get you through because you're not needing it for an hour, 2 hours, you're needing it for the next 10 minutes.
Right, so what's interesting is so there are studies done that when you intake something sweet and you don't absorb it, but you just spit it out, it lights up receptors in the brain, so you think you're getting fuel, right? But when you take in that sugar and you go sprint, it's not like that sugar is in your bloodstream, in your muscle cell right now, it's all psychological. So the main thing, and this is what Bob said, when we were talking to him, a long time ago, he said, as long as an athlete can maintain their blood sugar levels at a fasting level, they can maintain peak performance. Because if you think about it, what we're doing, it's all a varying curve. People think that at low intensities you're only burning, you're burning dominantly fat. You raise the intensities, the body starts burning carbs. But what we do is we challenge that whole notion at higher intensities, the body can burn fat at higher intensities. Because remember, we are giving you a carbohydrate. It's not like you're burning 100% fat and 0 carb with UCAN. You're burning carbs and fats together. It's just the total calories that you're burning, such a larger percentage of them are going to come from fat. And I was talking about with that curve, like with Lance Leo, he's an endurance athlete, did that treadmill test where I said that at 10.9 miles per hour, he's burning around 53% fat. And that's 10.9 miles per hour is extremely high intensity. And so if you're able to burn over 50% fat at that high intensity, what are you doing? You're not tapping into your glycogen as much. You're keeping your blood sugar steady, but also burning a ton more fat than you would, if you're consuming the Hammer products or what he compared himself to, which is just basic maltodextrin.
So what's going on when you see pros late in the run who are drinking Coke? I mean, is that all psychological?
Well, remember, their blood sugar is probably dropping, so it's great.
Right.
They're playing catch up with their bodies.
Okay.
But a ton of it is psychological, and that's what that study had shown, is that when you intake something sweet and you spit it out, it lights up receptors in the brain. You probably all feel that. I mean, that's why, and also, so UCAN it should be your dominant nutrition so you can get all the benefits, but it doesn't mean that during Ironman you're going to get hungry. You might need other things besides your fuel source. So some people do psychologically say, I'd like a little bit of a gel or something like that. It's just not their main source. It might be something on the side. I mean, there's a guy who lives in my building, actually. He said 2 gels, he's a trail runner, for 2.5 hours. He's had the same 2 gels sitting in his jacket for a year, because he always keeps them as like this insurance. I always see him when we get coffee downstairs, and he's got the same 2 gels, and he likes the lemonade flavor, and he has 1 packet to last him 2.5 hours. But the first time he did it, he brought those 2 gels thinking he would need them. So if you're someone who's just anybody running a marathon soon? What are you running?
Central Park, end of February.
So for people who are doing just a marathon, for example, they might have 2 packets before, they load before, because it lasts you a little bit longer if you double the dose. But then either they might not notice they need a gel until, let's say, mile 17, or if they've been training with Ucan. So they say, you know what, I'll gel at 17 and I'll gel at 22, and that's fine, right? I don't want to carry, I don't want to make Ucan into a gel. Then again, we have customers who become extremely creative. They're actually taking Ucan, they're putting it in a Ziploc bag, they're losing a little bit of water, making it into a paste in a bowl, then spooning it into a Ziploc bag, rolling it up, using rubber bands, and then biting it off, and making 2 of those, one for mile 10 and one for 17, because we've noticed that that's between a 3.5 and 4.5 hour marathon. That's been the best overall general use, and you can figure what you need based on a long run. But so, and there are people that just feel so stable, and because as you work out more and the time increases, you burn fat even more so because you're obviously tapping into even more. And some people just feel so good that they don't even want that gel. And it's not about preventing the GI issues, it's just they don't feel they need it, so why take it?
You
And
guys
a
should start
big
making
thing-
gels.
A big
What?
thing,
You guys should start making gels.
We already make, these are early product formats.
Yeah, yeah,
where
sure.
we're just, customers are so eager. Brian had one customer email him that she was putting it to a shampoo bottle.
Oh,
travel shampoo, yeah, I saw her at Marine Corps Marathon, and she emailed me the next weekend, and she said, I took the Ucan and I put it, I mixed 1 serving, put it in a travel shampoo bottle, stuck it in my sports bra, and then, had 2 packs before, mile 17, I just took it out. I had another girl email me, and this was maybe the craziest one I've seen, but she was making Ucan into a paste, and she was emptying out her old gel packets, taking a medical syringing it into the gel packet and stapling it shut.
Just use the fuel bot has a little flask.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
fuel belt bottle, she was
Yeah,
so
you just-
particular about, like, I don't want, yeah, I
People
know,
take a 10 ounce-
it's crazy.
People
what
take a 10
people
ounce
do.
fuel belt bottle, and they put either like 4 scoops, because around 1.5 scoops to 2 scoops equals a packet, and they put 4 scoops in, have half of it at mile 10, half at 17, and they fuel with 2 scoops before. That's all they need. But to go back to your point, one more thing is that you have to remember your muscles, your body has tons of carbohydrates stored there. You can tap into even quicker than if you have ingest that gel, because that gel has to go through your stomach, through your intestines, through your bloodstream, and then to your muscle cell. So as long as you've eaten enough carbohydrates the week before, that's why people sometimes carb load or just make sure you eat enough calories, you should have plenty of carbs to tap into for especially anything under 3 hours.
And that's especially true if you've been training in such a way that emphasizes metabolic efficiency where you're burning fat. Theoretically, you haven't tapped in and used that glycogen stored in your muscles already, so then when you do need to raise the intensity, it's still there.
Exactly, so all training, the whole point is to upregulate mitochondrial enzymes to burn more fat and spare your glycogen. All training does that, which is why we've, athletes who have terrible diets. The LA Clippers use our product, Golden State Warriors. I mean, NBA athletes are known to eat terribly, yet when they have a packet of Ucan, it lasts them 3 hours because they're training so much to allow them to have these adaptations that we put them in the ideal state to take advantage of it instead of slamming Gatorade and having 24 ounces at halftime, or then sitting out and then everything drops down because they've sat out. Most athletes, the adrenaline rush usually keeps them at a certain point, but especially in sports where you sit out or you drop the intensity, that's when you notice everything starts to decline.